Alright, everybody, hello and welcome. As always, I am Shaun. This is the reserve team. Our season preview series continues with last season's third place finishers, the Wellington Phoenix, our New Zealand representative in Australian and New Zealand football. Thankfully, we've got two fantastic experts close to the New Zealand football community that are going to walk me through this today, and we're going to get some fantastic opinions from both of them. We are joined today by making his debut on the channel, reserveteam.com.au collaborator, Zach Taylor. Zach, thank you so much for joining us, mate.
Thanks for having me. It sounds to be a great time.
Yeah, any excuse to talk football, mate. We could do it all afternoon, but we will try and stay on topic throughout the course of the evening. And then, of course, joining us as well, you may know her from her work with the Ladies League and a part of the Yellow Fever as well. Of course, a reserve team collaborator, Tracy. Thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Any time. We've got a whole bunch of different stuff that we're going to go through for the Wellington Phoenix. We're going to talk a little bit about their history. We're going to talk about a little bit about their challenges over the last couple of seasons. And I think really for one of the clubs in the league with probably the brightest futures. They had an excellent season the season before last. They had an excellent season last year. I think a lot of people are incredibly excited to see what they're going to do in 2020 and 2021 as well. But first, before we get stuck into that future stuff, I will give people a small recap for anyone that may not be familiar with the New Zealand side or maybe watching from overseas or anything like that. But during the second season of the A-League in 2006-2007, the FFA removed the New Zealand Knights A-League licence due to both financial and administrative problems that the New Zealand Knights had in the first two seasons of the league, and of course, poor on-field performance. They had finished bottom of the competition in both those years, setting records for lowest points totals and lowest wins in a season that lasted quite a long time in the league itself. The licence was then transferred to New Zealand Football at the time, known as New Zealand Soccer, to manage the New Zealand Knights in their final months as a club as the board had resigned and walked away, and an additional provisional licence to sublet to a suitable New Zealand-based team to enter in the 2007-2008 season. After a difficult search and pressure from Australian bids to be given that additional licence or to sublet directly from New Zealand Football, Wellington businessman Terry Serapiso stepped forward to fund beginnings of a new Wellington-based club. In March 2007, the FFA handed the big group a provisional 3-year licence, and the club was confirmed to commence in the 2007-2008 season. That licence confirmation came 4 months before they were due to first kick a ball, a very quick turnaround to get themselves ready for the start of the new season. 250 names were submitted by the public as part of the new bid, with Phoenix picked from a final group of 6 due to both the symbolism of a fresh start for New Zealand football, the rising from the ashes of the New Zealand Knights, and the fiery local support that had come forward from the Wellington football community. In the 2011-2012 season, it did emerge that Serapisos was experiencing personal and business financial difficulties impacting the club, including late payments of players, late payments to coaches, and certain administrative and office staff also not being paid. It is rumoured during this time that Ricky Herbert, the current head coach of the Wellington Phoenix, was owed $100,000 in unpaid wages. Though initially reluctant to relinquish his ownership, it was announced that he had ceded the licence and ownership of the club in September 2011. A few months later, the club's licence was passed by the FFA to a new consortium of 7 Wellington businessmen, forming the Wellnix ownership group, which remains in place to this day. On the field, Wellington had been greatly improved on the previous New Zealand Knights side, finishing 8th in their inaugural season, 6th with a first finals appearance in their second year, 4th place, 6th place, and 4th place in their first 5 seasons. Arguably as good a first 5 years in the A-League as any club experienced, making 3 consecutive final series in succession from 2010 to 2012, and twice making the semi-final stage during that period. We will get a bit more into the modern history as we go through some of our topics and talk about the different roster types and all that sort of stuff. But what I'd love to hear from both of you are some of your earliest memories about the Phoenix, first when they were founded, if you were around at that time, and also what drew you to them as a club. Zach, I'll give you the first chance to go through it. What are some of your earliest or fondest memories of the Wellington Phoenix?
Well, I mean, I don't really remember them being founders. I think wasn't even in school then. But my first memory of the Phoenix was I actually did some research for this. November the 5th in 2016, we beat the Newcastle Jets 2-0, and I went with my uncle. It was the first ever football match I ever watched. I grew up playing rugby, watching rugby, and we beat the Newcastle Jets 2-0. I think that was the only win we had in like 5 games. But from then on, I fell in love with the Knicks, and I've been supporting them ever since.
No, that's absolutely perfect. There's across all the clubs, there's quite a few different people that have come from backgrounds that aren't necessarily like football or familial backgrounds. So I think when we spoke with Melbourne City last season, Isaac only went to his first game in 2016, and he just randomly went because I think he got a free ticket. And City won 4-1, and he loved seeing like the lights and the colour and all that sort of stuff in the stands. It wasn't necessarily represented anywhere else in the league. We've had Sydney FC fans whose families are largely NRL supporters, who again just love that crowd experience and that crowd exposure. I don't know if, as a non-football fan, how I'd feel about like, the 80th minute whipping the kid off or anything like that. But I'm glad that it stuck with you, Zach. I'm glad you gave it a second chance and continued supporting the league and the team up until this day. Tracy, obviously, you're much closer involved with the Yellow Fever and very tightly integrated into the fabric of the club and the supporter group. What are some of your earliest and fondest memories of the club itself?
So similar to Zach, I guess, I grew up in a rugby household and didn't actually see my first football game until first match that the Phoenix played. I don't want to give too much away because I do actually plan on writing about my history. Yeah. But I was at massage college to getting a diploma in therapeutic massage, and was working with. I also had a knee injury and was seeing a physio to help me with that, and he happened to be the physio for the Phoenix. And I got chatting to him about having to do some clinic hours, and he kind of said we could do with some basically free labour. Do you guys want to come and do your experience with the Phoenix? We got free match tickets. So started just going to the games because we got tickets and it was free, and it just sort of kicked off from there. The Phoenix are responsible for igniting my football passion, I guess. When it comes to the Yellow Fever, it was again an accident that happened. I went to South Africa for the 2010 World Cup to follow the All Whites. I knew to football and thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. Met the crew. So in national football season, we rebranded to White Noise. It was the tour that I went on to South Africa and came back and met all the boys from the Yellow Fever and history.
No, that's fantastic. And of course, the 2010 World Cup, you came home undefeated, having not tasted defeat during the course of that competition. So that's a really good way to get involved in the international football space as well. Maybe you're a lucky charm for both the Wellington Phoenix and the New Zealand football sides as well, given that they have had pretty improved performances over the last few seasons and last few years. But I think really fantastic to see. It echoes quite a bit across a variety of different clubs in the league that really, once people just kind of get their foot in the door at an A-League side or at a football side, they really enjoy the experience, they really enjoy the match day, and it really becomes something that they support and follow through. There aren't many people that we've seen or heard from, and obviously we're spoiled in the reserve team group because it all is football-minded people, but there aren't many people who went to a game and didn't find something that they enjoyed about it, or didn't find something that they wanted to see more of or wanted to support further, and I think that's really great and really exciting for a lot of the league. The challenge that we've all got, and that you guys have, of course, over in Wellington as well, is getting more people with that foot in the door. Once you get them there, it's actually really easy to retain them, but it's that first initial jump, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit further in the future. Moving forward to some of their modern history, the last 5 seasons, and most recently last season in the A-League, have been somewhat up and down, but they have been, as I mentioned in the intro, a little bit better over the last couple of seasons especially. In 2015-2016, they did finish 9th, their lowest finish in an A-League season. 2016-17 finished 7th, 17-18th again finished 9th, but 2018-2019 they finished 6th, and then last season a 3rd place finish. There are 2 different catalysts to that. There's noted bully and stalker Mark Rudan being involved at the club, finishing 6th that first season, and then last season Ufuk Talay using what was a decent base and taking it to an entirely different level with that 3rd place finish, their highest regular season finish in the A-League since their inception, and a defeat at the elimination final stage in a very difficult and trying circumstance. We don't have it as a specific agenda item, but obviously one of the huge things that Wellington's gone above and beyond in doing over the last kind of 3 to 6 months is heading over to New South Wales for the initial lockdown to close out the A-League season, not just being away from their colleagues in an entirely different country, away from their family, in a really difficult time for a lot of different people. And then they've also backed that up and done that again this off-season. As we speak, the Wellington Phoenix side are all based out of Wollongong in New South Wales to try and circumvent some of the border closures relating to that. So huge huge credit to the club, huge credit to the playing group, to the staff, all those sort of people who are sacrificing quite a bit of time away from their friends, family, whatever else in a difficult period and difficult time of the year. Huge credit to each and every one of them. I'll go to both of you guys because I want to hear more about, one, your season highlights, and two, reflect a little bit on how Wellington's done, particularly over the last 2 seasons. Tracy, we'll let you go up first for this one.
I think the results, have spoken for themselves. Obviously, having someone new coaching after the Mark Rudan saga is refreshing to have players who respect their coaches outwardly, fans who can now respect a new coach after all the rumours were circulating. I think the biggest thing for me, and it's not nothing to do with the on-field performances, but talking about the end of that season and playing in Australia and having to be away from families and stuff, I think that's a huge credit to the club and the environment that they've built, because some of those players have young families who they were away from for a long time. Backroom staff who went, physios, strength and conditioning coaches, all those people who went, I think, are a massive asset to the club, and they deserved where they got to at the end of the season. And I think it was really important for us to show that we can compete, and it would have been very easy if we didn't get to that place to go, oh, well, circumstances have meant that this is why we've been rubbish, sort of thing. But we got to that 3rd place into that playoff, and so didn't really need to use any excuses, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's all I got.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think you make a really good point. Like, at a time when Perth Glory couldn't get their marquee player to come back from a caravan holiday he'd taken up the coast, where Brisbane Roar couldn't get their coach to come back into the country after he returned to Europe during the pandemic break. You had Wellington at the same time going above and beyond to really try and get their season not back on track, but try and conclude it in the right way and keep their footballing group together. And I think it speaks volumes for the club culture as well that they're developing. They're definitely obviously on the right track if they've got not just that buy-in from playing groups, but from coaches and staff and conditioning and all that sort of stuff that you've mentioned. Zach, what were some of your favourite highlights from the past season? I know it's a very long one, so feel free to just pick up anything that you really enjoyed from the past year.
Mine are probably a bit more spiteful than Tracy's, but I've kind of got 2. One of which is that picture of Mark Rudan walking off the pitch, grimacing. That made my season, and then also just beating Western United 2-0 at home. That was just, after all that happened the previous season, that was just really satisfying.
You don't ever have to be worried about being spiteful, because if you've ever seen me go on a little bit of a rant and a little bit of a tear, there's nobody worse that's on the channel. So I think you're absolutely fine. And 2 wonderful moments. If editor Shaun remembers, I will flash up that photo of Mark Redan cringing behind that photo, because it was an excellent part of the league itself. Jumping forward, so we go through this for every single one of the clubs around the league. But first, the stadium, the Cake Tin itself, Westpac Stadium, or as it's now known, and by all means correct me, is it Sky Stadium at the moment still? Yeah, so a couple of years to go with that one. There's quite a few different grounds around the league, and if you watch some of our early content on the channel, we went through and ranked the different stadiums, and there are some phenomenal rectangular stadiums in New Zealand because of the proud rugby history. What do you guys think of Wellington as far as the Cake Tin is concerned, and how it feels, or how it serves as a home for the Wellington Phoenix? Zach, we'll let you go first on this one.
When it's full, it's amazing. When it's full, like for an all-whites game, for instance, it's one of the best atmospheres I've ever been. When it's empty, it's like 2 people cheering 300 meters away across the football field. It's not. There's no atmosphere. I mean, we try and make their atmosphere, but it's just an empty, massive stadium, and it's not great. The pitch is good though.
Yeah, the pitch quality is fantastic, and I love that the seats are yellow. Like, I think more clubs need to be developing, more cultivated imagery relating to where they play. I think that part's fantastic. But we've spoken at length across the channel about like the use of oval stadiums and the distance you are from a match, and you could get a full stadium, and even then trying to recover being 50, 60 metres back from the ground itself, it's really hard to, create that cauldron atmosphere that we see in other parts of the world. Tracy, what are some of your thoughts on the Cake Tin?
As a Wellingtonian, you have to love it, right? For a ground, like Zach said, when it's full, it's amazing. I feel like I'm too far from the pitch, and even if you're standing at the very front of that stadium, you're still so far from the pitch, which I don't not a fan of. We set ourselves up, the Yellow Fever, kind of in the middle of an aisle, on the cusp of where the roof stops. So we don't have that noise either. It doesn't sort of bounce off and echo back that well. So I mean that could easily be fixed, right? We could just move a little bit higher, but then you get further from the action. So it's a rock and a hard place kind of situation. Like I guess we've covered, the grass itself is great. I broke my arm on the grass last year, actually. No, you missed all that. That was pre the reserve team. But November last year, I was slide tackling a child, and didn't end well for me.
I saw that live.
My arm. Oh, did you? Lucky. They had to realign my arm, so that was great. Yeah.
I'm surprised that didn't make your season highlight. I wonder if that... But if you know what? If that kid goes on to like represent the All Whites or the Football Ferns or something like that, you've got a story of way back in the day when you tried to 2-foot them out on the K-Tin pitch, which is absolutely fantastic. I do have a follow-up question. I apologize because I didn't put this on the agenda. Obviously, I think, Tracy, you're quite involved with Team Wellington and a few of the other sides. Are there any other venues in and around Wellington that you think would be perhaps more suitable to some of the Wellington, smaller games? So when they don't get as many travelling fans, or like it's tough to convince people to get down to watch them play the Mariners, or one of the other sides that might be struggling in the league. Do you see any smaller boutique venues in and around the Wellington area that could potentially be leveraged?
I think the problem is there's nowhere that would fit A-League regulations. You might remember a few years back we played 3 home games at the Hutt Rec Ground, which is out of Wellington City in Lower Hutt, and had to set up temporary stands around the 3 sides of the pitch because there's only one grandstand. It was amazing. We were close to the action. It was smaller. It was full. So that was really cool. But in terms of existing infrastructure, I don't think there's really anywhere that would work.
Well, I mean, which is
unfortunate.
Yeah, I know. Fingers and toes crossed. The 2023 World Cup leads to a boost in infrastructure support in and around the Wellington area, and because there's some fantastic stadiums, like at Auckland, we spoke about Eden Park, and I think it's I've forgotten the name, but it's the indoor stadium. Is it something Far or something Bar?
Forsyth Bar in Dunedin.
Yeah, Forsyth Bar, which the one A-League game that was there looked absolutely amazing. Like, the real hope is that maybe we can, off the back of the upcoming World Cup in a few years' time, leverage a bit more boutique stadium stuff so that we do get better viewing experiences, and it does kind of really match the size of the league itself. But that's more of a fingers and toes crossed thing.
In Wellington, it's less of an issue of money, I think. It's more of an issue of we're like a really, really hilly city, and you'd like to get somewhere that's flat enough to put a stadium on that's not already occupied by the stadium or by the city, is you'd have to go like a good hour's drive outside the city, and you won't get anyone going out there. There is one stadium, I believe, that does fit the A-League specifications in Wellington, but it's out in Porirua. But from what I know, it's really run down, and I think it's like, yeah, it's not really up to standard.
There was also talk, so the area that the current stadium occupies is like an old rail yard, essentially. All the railway lines go directly there. There was some talk, I believe, of building a smaller stadium right next to the current stadium, a small rectangular sort of boutique stadium, to sort of set up like a sports hub and be able to use it for those smaller rugby venues, rugby games, football games, all of that sort of stuff as well. But I don't think that got off the ground. I think a lot of the land is just not available, so it wouldn't work out. Yeah. So also just going back to the stadiums around the country, so you mentioned Forsyth Bar. We've played 2 games that I can recall, one in Napier, which was a small stadium as well, and one in New Plymouth. I think we were supposed to have another one in New Plymouth, but after it wasn't earthquake strengthened, I don't think, so it wasn't able to be used. But we talked about, there's a little bit of a joke about a travelling circus, the Phoenix becoming a travelling circus when we take games away from Wellington. And I can talk about this in the metric section as well, but you're trying to build a crowd base in Wellington as the home ground, and then you take the games away. A lot of unless you can get those fans from those cities to come, all you're getting is the hardcore Wellington fans who are willing and able, I guess, to travel to those places. Yes, it's getting exposure for the Phoenix in New Zealand, being the only team in New Zealand, but at the same time, you're taking away from that Wellington-centred base.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will talk about that, I think, a little bit further when we get to our metric discussion later on. But it's such a difficult balance for different clubs across the league, and not just in Wellington, but across the league, to try and find that additional exposure. So I think for Wellington, they're trying to balance both the expectation to have that membership base in Wellington that you've referred to, and that diehard group that wants to be there at their games week in, week out, and then also trying to boost additional like television viewership figures across the country as well. So I think it's a challenge for them, obviously in Auckland specifically, but for the rest of the country, I think some of that road trip mentality is trying to capture potentially, and we'll talk about it further, too big of a catchment rather than focusing, probably a higher percentage audience in and around the Wellington area. But I think you both make excellent points. Thank you as always for contributing and helping boost my knowledge at the very least. Moving forward to the kit corner, which we do every week in honour of Bran and his love of kits around the club or around the league itself. Paladin, they did a fantastic job, I think, with last season's kit. What are some of your thoughts and feelings on the kits for last year, and hopefully what they might have planned for the upcoming season as well?
My biggest thing with having Paladin on board was that they did women's cut shirts. Can't fault them for anything after that. I think it's just super important to have that availability. In terms of the design, I think stripes are what we do, so it is what it is. Be nice to see some variation, but I'm happy.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you made about the stripes as well, because since the logo change, and I love the logo, like I think that Wellington logo is up there amongst the top tier logos in the league, and we did put it in our tier list at very high as well, but it's gotten away from representing the stripes anywhere on it. So I wonder if that's a deliberate marketing push on behalf of the club that Paladin represented, or it's just a coincidence that Paladin decided to go with a little bit more subtle colour variation. Zach, what are some of your thoughts on the kits?
I loved the special mental health kit that we did for one round in the season. I wasn't a massive fan of the home kit itself, just because it was. I mean, we eventually ended up all playing in canary yellow, and it was a bit sore on the eye for me. But I've got good hopes for this season because everything else from them I've seen has been pretty good.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like one of those things you think in 2020. Clubs should be able to, no matter who their supplier is, offer, like men's cuts, women's cuts, kids cuts, all that sort of stuff. And maybe being, I don't take this the wrong way, Paladin fans, please delete your comments already, but maybe being more of a boutique supplier and not as well known across the rest of the league kind of helps Wellington get like a cultivated supply and a specific market in a specific region, which is super helpful for them.
I mean, if any Socceroos supporters need a yellow women's cut kit, it's always... we've always got the Phoenix.
No, we got it, man. Soccer Twitter's undefeated. We got those kits, I think, within 2 days of them announcing they weren't going to be available. So now we've just got to make sure that we all follow through and go and buy one. Otherwise, we'll be in the same situation in 6 to 12 months' time. The weird part is that away kit, I don't actually like it that much, but I think it was more just, this should be a thing that exists. So hopefully there are a few lining the stands this upcoming W League season. And hopefully once the Matildas get back to playing again, we see it a little bit out there as well. Jumping forward now to the part which is always a little bit more in-depth a discussion, always a little bit more to go through, the playing squad. So we're going to go through both the players out, the players in, and the existing squad, the contracted players for next season. We mentioned it before we started recording, but the first 3 teams that we've gone through in the league season, it was very deliberate because arguably their football department have done really well in the contracts that they've offered. Quite a few clubs at the moment, given the additional restrictions relating to pandemic restrictions and whatever else, have, perhaps a polite way of putting it, has been challenging in terms of the contracts that they've offered out to clubs. But Wellington, I think, have done a really good job of keeping a good core group together. But before we get stuck into that core group, we're going to go through a couple of the players out because there are some relatively big names from last season's squad. Brandon Wilson has departed and moved to Perth Glory, which is a strange one because that's where he came from originally. He's basically just spent 12 months in Wellington on a gap year almost and heads back to the west coast of Australia. Matty Steinman heads to East Bengal, one of quite a few players that are heading over to the Indian Super League. Callan Elliott heads to 2nd Division Xanthi in Greece and Tony Popovic's pet project over there. Stephen Taylor, last season's captain, heads to Odisha in the Indian Super League. Gary Hooper heads to Kerala Blasters. Callum McCowett heads to FC Helsingør, who I think are a 2nd Division Danish team. By all means, feel free to correct me in the comment section below. And Liberato Kakache heads to Sint-Truiden in Belgium, where he is apparently, I haven't watched a lot of Belgian football so far this season, but apparently doing very, very well in the Kevin Muscat-led side. Tracy, I'll let you go first on this one. What are some of your thoughts on those players out, and potentially who do you think is the biggest loss to the overall group itself?
So I think losing Callan Elliott, he was starting to impress everybody. So losing him and not being able to watch him develop, I think, is more of the concern or more of the upset than actually losing him as a player for impact, if that makes sense. I think it would be wrong if I skipped over the loss of Stephen Taylor. Having that leadership in the back, I think, is especially important. And if you look at the potential backline that we have coming up for this season, it just lacks a bit of experience and leadership. So I think the biggest loss for me is probably Stephen Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, tough to see Longpins leave the league because I think he offered a lot both on the pitch and off the pitch. Just generally being a bit of a character in interviews and on the pitch as well, getting involved in the wall and all that sort of stuff. But it is one of those ones where you kind of have to think, I think he's 35 now, so he was probably coming into the last kind of year and a half of his contract really anyway, just prior to making that move. But yeah, definitely huge shoes to fill in that respect, and potentially maybe that's one of the reasons why Luke De Vere's contract was renewed so late in this offseason. He is, I think, the most recent re-signing for Wellington at the time of recording. Zach, looking through that list and those couple of people, any that jump out at you as being particularly big shoes to fill?
For me, the biggest three are Kakache, obviously. I think he was our best player, been for the last couple of seasons. But, we got roughly $2 million for him, from what I've heard. And that's big money. He was going to move on to Europe anyway. That was, that's who's going to be destined for that. Taylor, obviously, is the other big loss. He kind of leaves a massive leadership vat in our team. Like, I can't pick out an obvious captain there. We had Durante for years. Now we had Taylor, who was obviously the next captain. But there's not really, I can't really pick anyone there, so it's left that big gap in our team. And Steinman was really underrated last season. I think he was the kind of the crucial part to our midfield, just that pivot.
Just talking about leadership, I think for me, Alex Rufer is probably someone who can take that role in the leadership. So yes, he's younger, but I think he has the skills to be a leader in that squad.
Most of those players that we've gone through and that we're listing are relatively young players, and all of them are making jumps to overseas club. Yes, Brandon Wilson's a little bit, like kind of air quotes in terms of overseas there, but all of them making jumps to clubs over in Europe or in the ISL, which we've already spoken about. I think his ability to retain possession helped relieve that pressure quite a bit for the team. So huge tasks coming up this season for a couple of the forwards, which we'll talk about further in a moment as well. Before we jump into the contracts and the existing squad and the transfers that you guys have brought in, I did want to talk about, we pick for every club a big question, and this one is an interesting story. So we do have a little bit to go out through in advance, but in 2015, during a license extension discussion, FFA Chief Executive David Gallup infamously highlighted that Wellington was squatting on an A-League license, drawing derision from members of the football community in Australia and New Zealand. Squatting is an Australian term, I think, for when you're staying at someone's house that isn't necessarily yours, almost insinuating that Wellington were taking up a license spot from somebody else in the league. We could go on and fill an entire podcast on dumb shit that David Gallup did during his tenure, but that's just one. Despite this criticism, the Phoenix did sign a 10-year conditional license with the FFA in 2016. The first 4 years of that license, ending in 2020 this year, were guaranteed, while further 3-year extensions were contingent on meeting certain targets, in air quotes, metrics, that were to be reviewed in 2020 and 2023 to bring them through to the 2026 period. The FFA, at various points, they love their buzzwords, they love the word catchment, they love the word metric. In 2018, then FFA Chief Executive highlighted that Wellington's position in the league may be under threat due to missed metrics in the first 2 seasons of that agreement. This led to active fan support across the country and across clubs across the league follow the Nix in and Nix out movement. We saw signs at a variety of different games not involving Wellington in both Australia and New Zealand. And further support from A-League owners across the league. It's very well, or it's to be believed. I don't have any of their phone numbers. I don't speak to any of them on Twitter or anything, but a lot of the A-League ownership group actually holds Wellington chairman Rob Morrison in very high respect, and across the Australian or the Asia Pacific Professional Clubs Association as well. In May 2019, the Wellington Phoenix were sent a $1 million bill by the FFA for failing to hit their required off-field metrics in the 2018-2019 season. While it is believed that the newly independent A-League effectively removes the FFA's control over their ability to remove Wellington Phoenix from the league as an established and existing side, they do still retain final say on licence extensions, expansion, national second divisions, which is a big topic over here, and a variety of other things that will impact Wellington in the way that the game is run and operated within the Australia-New Zealand area. It is expected that the next license renewal that Wellington Phoenix is up for in 2023 will bring the Knicks in line with the other A-League sides, taking them all the way through to the 2033-2034 season, which is when all of the club's next license review process takes place. Hopefully, fingers crossed, securing the Knicks in the league for the long-term future, which I think everyone at the reserve team and everyone across the league is what we want to see happen. But what I'd love to get is feedback from you guys on those metrics and how you guys think perhaps, the Wellington Phoenix have changed over the last couple of seasons to try and address some of those issues. So the first one's attendance. They had an 8,084 attendance average for the last season, obviously impacted by coronavirus and the pandemic across the world. That's a little bit of a misnomer figure. It is the fourth lowest in the league itself, but still ahead of the likes of Western United, the Newcastle Jets and Central Coast Mariners. The television audience has improved in New Zealand, but does have a sharp decline in Australia. That does follow along with a lot of formatting in the rest of the league and a lot of the other clubs as well, though. There is a very uniform pattern for people not really wanting to pay for subscription TV services, Sky Sports in New Zealand, Foxtel in Australia, and membership targets. They did increase on 2018-2019 season, but still remain the second lowest membership base in the league itself. Zach, we'll give you the first opportunity relating to attendance, television audience, membership targets. What's some of the ways that you think Wellington could potentially continue moving in the right direction, or how should they be targeting that approach?
Well, I mean, I think the kind of the area I'm best to talk about is kind of appearing to the youth. So like with people around my age, I think a lot of them either don't really care about sports that much or just care about rugby. And I think it's kind of going into schools, going to talk about football and that kind of thing. That's how I know a lot, because I've several friends that follow the Phoenix as well, and that's how most of them got into the Phoenix, just going around to schools, going around to things like that, and just talking to people about the Phoenix, talking to people about football, inviting them along. And that's a really good way of getting young people out there. And just because so many young people play football in New Zealand that don't turn into football fans, that if you go along and show that there's a professional football there that's on display, if you do that, then you'll get so many more families coming along to games.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Australia, where football is the highest participation sport amongst boys and girls under the age of 14, and yet we can't really reflect that in the league itself. I'm in a similar scenario. Like a Melbourne City fan, we are quite often criticised about our lack of fan engagement and our smaller crowd sizes comparative to a lot of the bigger sides within the league, given that we are from a relatively large city and a relatively large football community. But one of the things that we spoke about in our Melbourne City preview as well is trying to get that young fan engagement. So many people that are part of the reserve team even got their initial exposure to Australian football and A-League football just by looking up the kits on FIFA or trying to play as a team on FIFA or Football Manager or whatever else, trying to get more of those fans along to a game. Potentially if Wellington or someone had a game where they knew they weren't going to sell a lot of tickets, like we mentioned, Tracy, when you spoke about your earliest interactions, getting a free ticket as free labour, maybe if you pay a registration fee in and around the Wellington area, you get to go a free child's ticket to go to a Wellington game, and just getting them to that first one game might potentially help get them in the door and help get kids effectively wanting to go and watch the game week in, week out. Sorry, Tracy, did you have something that you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I have a lot of feels about this whole metrics thing. I could go on for a while.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, this is totally one of those things where there's some person in a boardroom who thinks the word metrics is incredibly important, but they're looking at it from a business perspective or a KPI perspective, instead of looking at it from how do you grow and cultivate a football club and consistency in a fan base, which is an entirely different proposition to what is effectively spreadsheet figures and whatever else. But I will pose the same question to you: attendance, television audience, membership targets. How do you think Wellington is tracking so far, and how do you think they can move forward in the future?
I think in terms of tracking, this bugs me. So I have our sheet up here, and I'm saying that we're the fourth lowest in the league attendance. So yes, that's a problem. Rather than say metrics not being applied to those teams who consistently cannot get higher, even Central Coast Mariners, the Jets, for example. I mean, Western United could maybe be forgiven this season because they are a new side, but that's me being very generous. But when this whole thing happened, we're one of the most stable clubs in terms of having owners who back us, and you've got financial woes all across the league. So why is it us? Why is it me? Anyway, how can we move on from that? I think the club trying. So to Zach's point about getting that youth market, I know there were some attempts in the past to try and target the sort of uni-aged people in Wellington. But the problem with that is that Wellington is a university city, so being a summer league, the students aren't here to go to football. So that makes it hard to target those people. The community stuff, they're going to schools a lot more. There's tickets going to kids. I think it was 2 seasons ago, the club ran a thing where they gave tickets to lower decile schools in the area, and provided tickets and also buses to come to bring the people into the games to try and boost that. But I think that becomes an issue because it's hard, because in those areas they can accept the free stuff, but they might not be able to make that a regular thing and be able to come frequently because of the cost involved in coming to those games. So I think maybe there's a little bit more that could be done there. They also do a really good job with the immigrant community. So the Phoenix have won awards in that space, setting up communities and working with those communities to get them involved or to bring them along to the stadium, etc. TV audiences, I think, like you say, there's a decline across the league. So for the Phoenix to be targeted for that as well, I think is a bit of an issue. Just with regards to the memberships, I think obviously that's not going to go up anytime soon. They have released a package for this season, which obviously doesn't include any tickets to matches because we're not going to see any here. So I think the really important part for the club is to try and retain fans despite not having a product to play or to deliver.
That in-stadium environment, that in-stadium atmosphere that really separates it from, it's probably its biggest advantage over, rugby in New Zealand, AFL football in Australia, is that entirely different atmosphere and environment. But you hit on a really interesting point, which I think is that Wellington market and the student area. If I was a student knowing my university experiences and I had to choose between $20 to go out on a uni night and $20 to go to an A-League game, I'm not 100% sure I would pick the A-League game every week. Zach, that's future spoilers for your university journey when you eventually get to that point. But yeah, it is a tough one. It's not the most flush with cash demographic that you're trying to really get involved with there. So it can be a challenge. The interesting point I think you also mentioned is that if the league is making this season a transition to more of a winter format, and potentially in 2022 taking that a step further to being an entirely winter-based competition, maybe that challenge, it kind of resolves itself a little bit. Maybe there are more university students there and available. The challenge, which I'm about to get to, is competing for that NRL space, because that's when that season is fully blooded and fully going. You did shake your head there briefly, Tracy. What were you going to say?
I think for us, from my observation, the issue with the winter is getting club players to come to games, because I'm around the local football community during the winter season, and a lot of those players will be spending their Saturdays recovering or drinking, putting money across their club rooms, bars, rather than making that schlep to the stadium to go and watch those games. So I think that's another can of worms, but that's for another day, I think.
That's a full podcast topic, because it's the same thing over in Australia, to be completely honest. Most of the people in the reserve team are involved in an NPL structure club. I'm a community Sunday league, state league, shit kicker level club, but even then, that does take up a significant chunk of time throughout the weekend. If there was a game or a clash match during that period, I'm not 100% sure that I could even get to it, and I love going to the football. So yeah, it is a real challenge. There is that risk of one of the biggest strengths the game has, which is our participation rates in Australia and New Zealand. We're now going to cannibalise that support by making them choose between their local football competition or community club and the A-League competition. But yeah, it's one of those tough ones where there are cases and arguments for both sides of it. But, we don't really know until we do it. We don't really know until it happens how that's actually going to play out and how that's going to work. Go for it.
So, I have been going through the like youth football system. Not that it's any good, but I was going through like younger youth level grades for football, and been going to school while the Phoenix have been existing, and they do offer tickets sometimes at discounted prices to clubs, to youth members of clubs, but the issue is it's just you're not getting that engagement because you're not kind of like knowing that what they are if you're that young. But like if they come to the school, I don't know like how much they go to schools, but from what I know, it's not a hell of a lot. But one of my teachers knew Leo Bertos back in the day, and when I was 5, he came to our school and he taught some of us like the basic skills of how to kick a football and stuff. And from that, 12 people of the class are now season ticket holders for the Wellington Phoenix out of a class of about 20. So that impact is just, it's really dramatic. And if they do that more, they can get so many families. I think it's just such an important part.
Yeah, and that's been the big challenge. Like, I think for a lot of kids, if you took a kid to like a Rebel Sport or wherever, or whatever the equivalent is in New Zealand, and said, what kit do you want to get? They're probably going to pick out like Ronaldo and Messi. So even though we compete within other codes, we're also competing with international European football where it is on another level. The big advantage that they have, exactly as you've mentioned, is that there is better accessibility to the playing group, and you can meet, like, Leo Bertos is a full New Zealand international. He's someone's hero, I'm sure, even if it's just his nan or his mum or something like that. But you got to meet him one-to-one. I actually met Bruno Fornaroli in a Kmart just before Christmas a couple of years ago. Like, you can't get that sort of access in any sort of other football league around the world. So it's definitely something that I think needs to be leveraged, not just for Wellington, but across the league as a whole. Like, more community engagement, more active engagement with playing groups as well. And given that we are now, we're a full-time league, I don't think it would be that horrific for, if it's a Monday recovery day, that you go do your recovery session in the afternoon, you go and visit a school in and around the area. I think stuff like that helps more than perhaps, we hear about as far as community stories are around the league. But fantastic to hear that, that's your experience and that helped you bring into the Phoenix fold. We hope we see more of it. So I think, Tracy, you made an excellent point there relating to the Wellnix ownership group and the way that they're like really propping up the league and making it one of probably the best run off-field groups within the league itself. One of the challenges that I think we're not going to credit him at all, but David Gallup has mentioned previously lack of support potentially coming from New Zealand football. And certainly from the outside perspective, and I don't claim to be an expert on this at all, but from the outside perspective, it really is that Wellnix group of those, 7 prominent businessmen really underwriting Wellington and making sure that elite level pathway is there in Australian and New Zealand football. If you were going to be kind of critical or at least provide constructive feedback, where would you like to see New Zealand football kind of stepping up their game and their input to support the Phoenix further?
Because there is that disconnect. So yes, they're a professional club. Yes, they're based in New Zealand. However, they are playing in Asia, essentially. So New Zealand football have to focus on the New Zealand side of things. And, so I went to the club, what do you call it? The Oceania Champions League in Vanuatu last year. And Team Wellington to watch Team Wellington play, and the logo on the programs that they had over there was the Phoenix logo. And even in those Pacific regions, that there's still that disconnect of the Phoenix are seen to be the New Zealand team, but they're not eligible to play in Oceania Champions League. But then their academy side is not eligible to win. Well, I mean, they could win the league, but it wouldn't mean anything for them to win the New Zealand National League because they're not eligible to play because they are an Asian club for the purposes of the A-League. So I think that disconnect really makes it difficult for them to figure out where they fit. New Zealand football, where they can input and have an impact. But I would suggest that some sort of funding needs to be made because it is the one and only professional pathway in the country for footballers, male footballers, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That's
almost female footballers.
Again, that's another story.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast topic, and we've got some stuff coming up this week. If you guys want to jump in on that discussion, by all means, I'll make sure that you guys get booked to give us the proper Wellington perspective. Sorry, Zach, you were going to jump in with something there?
I also think that there's been kind of some complication, not that I'm a big expert on it, but from what I've heard, there's been some complicated just relationship, like personal relationships between the Phoenix and New Zealand football, and I know there's been some drama with the personnel and the people coming in and out of the FFA over Australia, and it's been a similar situation here. So it's not all necessarily smooth sailing as far as I know, and it's been, from what I hear, it's been getting better recently. But it's, there's relationship issues there that.
So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out over the next few years, and if New Zealand football. Yeah, sorry, Zach.
Oh no, I was just going to say I've actually got some articles coming up on like stuff that New Zealand football is doing, at least with the domestic league. At least hopefully I've got them coming up, so there might be some more interesting stuff around this in those articles.
Look forward to it, mate. Rubbing my hands together to see more Zach stuff on the channel as well. We're now going to jump back into talking about our squads, and I think this is always one of the most exciting parts and that people listening along will be looking forward to as well. Contracts extended. I'm just going to fire through these really quickly and then get some of your thoughts and feedback. Stefan Marinovic, Oliver Sale, Liam McGing, T. Atawe, Hudson Wahongi, Louis Fenton, Luke DeVere, Tim Payne, Sam Sutton, Cameron Devlin, Alex Rufer, Joshua Sotirio, David Ball, Ulysses Devere, Reno Piscopo, and Ben Wayne, all contracted for next season. That is the longest list of contracted returning players of any club in the A-League, so huge credit to Wellington for trying to secure their players and giving them multi-year deals. Of that list, anyone that jumps out immediately to you guys as being, super key and critical for the season ahead?
Well, for me, the three biggest ones, at least, were David Ball. Obviously, he's one of our best players. I'd say he's probably our best. Ulysses Deville, if you consider him a striker, but he's one of our best strikers, and he's just crucial to the team. As well as that, Luke DeVere and Atawai Hudson Wahongi, they're both like that's our starting defensive partnership. So if we didn't have that, we would be in big trouble.
Sure. And Tracy, any key or critical players jumping out of that from that retained list?
I'm a huge fan of Cam Devlin. It's great that he's back. Again, keeping David Ball, I think, is huge. Devere as well. Ulysses Devere, not Devere. Accents do weird things, right?
No, your accent's great. I knew who you were talking about. Might have to put subtitles on a few of these episodes for any of our international audience, but we'll figure that out on YouTube and their algorithm. But yeah, it's a good group, and it's a strong group of players from last season as well. You mentioned Cam Devlin, the Phoenix over the last few years, going back to, Sarpreet Singh, Kakache, who we spoke about, some of the other players that have already headed over to Europe as well, like Elliott, like McCow. They are giving minutes to quality young players, and they are taking their games to another level. So good to see that they do still have, a relatively young core in and around that group of both Australian and New Zealand talent as well, which is fantastic to see. Now the ins, these are always the more exciting ones. So Clayton Lewis joins from Auckland City, making the jump up from the local New Zealand leagues. James McGarry, previous Wellington Phoenix Junior, makes his return from Willem II in the Eredivisie. Joshua Laws, Australian Youth International, makes his way across from Fortuna Dusseldorf, made most of his appearances in their second division side. Matt Riddington returns from Brisbane Roar after a season over in Australia with Newcastle Jets and then Brisbane later in the season. And promising youngster Mirza Muradovic also joins from Brisbane Roar as well. Definitely a youth-focused group in. We spoke about, Taylor leaving and Hooper leaving and some of those older heads. They definitely have gone back into the kind of that youth market to try and replace those players. Tracy, I'll let you go first. Any of those players jump out at you as potentially having a breakout season or being looking like they're going to be a very good recruit for the year ahead?
I'm going to be honest and say that I haven't seen any of these players play that much, apart from obviously Clayton Lewis playing at Auckland City, who are my rival team, so I'm not going to say good things about him, sorry.
He saw the light, though. He saw the light that Wellington was the superior place, and he's made the way across, so you've got to welcome him with open arms.
That's true. Hey, look, I'll welcome all of these people with open arms if they're going to play for the Knicks. Also, exciting to have Redemption back, so hopefully he can put in a good shift and get some minutes and impress, I think.
Yeah, definitely a player that showed a lot of promise, and then kind of his career stalled a little bit at Newcastle. He didn't necessarily get the same playing time or the same role that he had in his first few seasons at Wellington. But yeah, hopefully he gets his career back on track and does well for the group as well. I'm sorry, Tracy, you were going to add something there?
There's also talk of, I don't know how true it is or when it was going to happen, but there was rumours of us getting an Israeli striker to come and play for us. So I don't know where that's at or if it's going to happen, but I think if that was to happen, that would just give us a little bit more strike force.
That's Tomer Hamid. He's an Israeli striker. He's played for Brighton, QPR, Mallorca, Charlton, Almeria. He's played for a lot of big clubs in Europe. He was the striker that led Brighton to their Premier League promotion run. He was their main man in that season. So he looks pretty good from what I can see, and he's been very heavily linked. So if we get him, that's going to be big.
Yeah, I mean, we can only write down the ones that have actually moved across so far, but like in a year where probably international recruitment's going to be more difficult than ever before, like really trying to get those recruitments right is always a massive challenge. And I think that's why we're seeing at this point in the off-season, we haven't got more marquees joining the league at this stage, and we haven't got more international transfers happening. We just saw MacArthur make their really first two real big international signings in Echeverria and Susueta moving back across into the league. So it is kind of a weird time where we are sort of speculating and hoping that those players come in, but he sounds like he's got, some real quality behind him and some real high quality and high level football over in Europe as well, which will be fantastic to see.
Talking about you're talking about getting the young player signings and stuff like that, and obviously in this environment with not having the ability to sign international players, I think youth is the key, because we don't know how long this is going to last for. We don't know when we're going to be able to have those international, more senior players come in. So if you can get these guys in as young players and develop them and get them to stay, I think that's really important to develop the talent locally. So that when we do have those internationals and the qualifications coming up for tournaments, those players are playing together or against each other more regularly, so they know each other better and they can actually do that. At the moment, obviously, half our national squads are across the world, so having young players who are eligible to play for New Zealand, the Phoenix, is really important in trend.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him a little bit further when we get to the coaching area, but there is a committed coach that is definitely looking towards building that youth pathway, and he definitely has a lot of faith in the youth group. And arguably Wellington last season, in that third place finish, played some of their best football with a relatively young core and with a relatively young group. So they are definitely showing that there is a pathway there for young players to come into sides and at the same time maintain a high level of success if you've got the right players around them. Like obviously Stephen Taylor was a big leader in that dressing room. I still think De Villa is quality. Still think Ball is quality. I still think they've got some experienced heads. But yeah, definitely it'll be very much the youth recruitment will kind of make or break a lot of what we see with Wellington's season. So the big one that I think you guys haven't necessarily mentioned is Joshua Laws, because I haven't seen a lot of him, but he did play the two most recent Ollie Roos qualifiers for the Australian under-23 side. I'm not sure what exposure they got in New Zealand. He didn't start either of the games against Sydney FC or MacArthur, but when he was on, he looks the goods. Like he's a more deep-lying kind of defensive midfielder, like a proper number 6, in a similar mould to a Steinman, and he's built for the A-League. Like there was a couple of different times where he was, bossing the likes of Luke Bratton and Caceres off the ball, which isn't the easiest thing to do. They are experienced and quality players, but like he's got the physical tools and physical gifts. I think he's potentially he might be the breakout sleeper of that group of young players that you brought in that perhaps we don't know the most about now. But if we do, and hopefully we do, catch back up again in the middle of the season and the end of the season, he's maybe one of those sleeper players that we don't necessarily know about now, but could be a name that we remember quite a bit in the future. We're going to jump in and go through your preferred lineups and a few of the other things. We might talk about players like Joshua Laws and a few others that aren't necessarily in the lineup, but are adding depth and value to the overall squad. Zach, because I know you're chomping at the bit to talk to me about a few of these different players, I'm going to jump in and go through yours first. So first up, Zach, is your team that we can see on the screen here. Do you want to walk us through a bit of this group and who you think might be the key breakout stars, and potentially who was the first name that you put down on this team sheet when you wrote down your 11?
Well, the first name I put down is the first name on the team sheet. It's Marinovic. I think he's going to be key to our season. I think he's probably controversial, but I think he was the best keeper in the league last season. I think he's New Zealand's first choice keeper. I think he's amazing. He's made some suspect comments about COVID on social media, but I think he will be great. He will be great for us this season. Back row, I've got McGarry on the left. He's just he's actually been in the Phoenix before, but he's coming from Netherlands.
Holland, the Netherlands.
And he was good when he was here. He went over to the Netherlands, and I think he's going to be very good for us. We've obviously got De Vere and Tarafa Hudson-Wahongi in the back line. They've been solid last season. They're going to be pretty good. Fenton on the right, he's the person I was least sure about, was him or Tim Payne. Tim Payne was very good last season, but Louis Fenton's a Wellington boy, and I think he's probably just got a bit of all that attacking edge, which I think is what we'll need this season. We got Piscopo, Rufer, Devlin. I think they kind of picked themselves. Now, I know me and Tracy disagree on this, but I think that Clayton Lewis coming on the right, even though I think he's a left-footed player, I think he'll be very good for us this season. I really rate him. He's very good on the ball, very good passer. I really rate him. Then up top, obviously, we got Davila and Ball. They kind of pick themselves.
So interesting that you've gone with the inverted wingers, a right-footed player on the left and a left-footed player on the right. Tracy's already mentioned she can't start Clayton Lewis because of his Auckland ties, which is fair enough. Good a reason as any. If you were to pick out a particular spot, Zach, that you think maybe still needs improvement, we spoke about Tamir Haddad, or what was his name, Tamir Habard, as being a striker that may come in. Is there any area of the pitch that you think maybe we're lacking that little bit of depth, or maybe we're lacking a starter that potentially the club could still be looking to recruit in?
I think it's mainly depth, particularly in the midfield. I think we've got Redemption and Laws behind the midfield, but I feel that I'm not quite sure on how either of them will do. I don't know if from memory, Matt Redemption didn't get a lot of A-League football last season, so I'm not sure about him. But I think Te Arawhai Hata-Mahongi, I rate him, but I'm not quite sure how he will do in central defence starting, and we don't really have anyone really behind him. We've got Liam McGing, who I really rate, but he's still young, he's still developing, and I think we could really use some depth in centre-back, possibly a starter.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. And the other one, and I hate to mention it because he's had such an unlucky run, but Luke David doesn't have the greatest injury record either. There are, for a guy who's in his 30, I think he's 31, maybe 32, by all means, correct me in the comment section below if you know. He hasn't actually played that many seasons. Always a player that was full of promise during his time at Brisbane. Everyone rated him very highly when he was fit and on the park, but there were a few seasons where he didn't play that much football. So I think probably a big hope with him being in your starting lineup is that he does stay fit for the full year. And of course we want that. We want to see the best players out there on the pitch each and every week. But yeah, that could be a challenging area that maybe needs to be looked at a little bit further. Tracy, we're going to jump into your team now. And again, the challenge that we've got is that most clubs have only played a handful of friendly fixtures at this point, and sometimes, those lineups, sometimes player availability, sometimes structures do change a little bit. But it's good to see that you both went with the 4-4-2, which is very much Ufuk Taleh's mould from last season. Just the one change for your side, Tracy, you've gone with Sotirio on the right wing. Do you want to talk us through your team a little bit, who you think is going to be key and critical, and who was your first name on the team sheet?
So my first name on the team sheet, because I went by positionally, was also Marinovic. Just by default, just because he's a goalkeeper. Actually, it was probably a tie. It was probably between him and De playing up front. There would have been my first two listed. Because I was a bit nervous about this, I sent my team sheet to one of my friends and just asked him what he thought about it, and he said to me that he would have put Payne in there instead of Fenton. But again, Fenton's a Wellington boy, and I think if he can remain injury free, then he's going to be a great asset. And we all know he's got a history. He's got glass shoulders, but hopefully that doesn't come into play this season. We don't have to worry about that. So I think having both Louis and also Tim Payne there has that little bit of confidence that even if someone was to get injured, there is someone to play in that position for us. I think it'll also be interesting to see how De and Ball play up front together, and whether that actually is a strict 4-4-2 formation or whether that changes up a little bit. If we were to get another striker, I would say that potentially Ball is going to get shifted wider. Maybe Sotirio comes out of that lineup. Again, I think having Alex Rufer and Cam Devlin in that middle section, I think they're both excellent at what they do. So looking forward to seeing them working together. When we're talking about potential things that are missing right now, I would go back to my point about having leadership at the back, and with your comments about Luke De potentially and having injury troubles throughout. If you lose him, I think you lose a great deal of vocal leadership in that back line, which I think we will miss. So I would probably be looking to get someone in to fill that spot as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know, Zach, you mentioned it, but Marinovic, this could be a huge season for him. Social media aside, I think he's 29, 30 years of age now. He's a full New Zealand international. Like, he's really someone that you'd look to kind of step up and guide a younger side through there. I think James McGarry, we've already spoken about him, but he's arguably got the most unenviable job in the Wellington Phoenix lineup because Kakache was so good last season and was so well loved by the Phoenix support. Like, it's a really big role to fill, getting up and down that left-hand side, given the amount of work that he actually got through. But I think the big challenge, and it's a good problem to have, you both mentioned Fenton and Payne. You know, that's what you want. You really want to have difficult questions around the pitch and different players pushing each other for starting positions. Once you get to that stage where there's that complacency, it can be really hard to motivate sides if they're not getting challenged each day in training, if they know that their starting 11 position is assured. And I think some of those additional players that we spoke about that have come in, the likes of Lewis in your lineup, Zach, as well, like that depth with Sotirio and with Piscopo can only be good for the squad. I think Law's coming in and really trying to get his first senior football and senior minutes at an A-League level. Even then, that's only a good challenge because you're going to have multiple central midfielders trying to get involved, and I'm sure Riddington is desperate to get back out on the park and get minutes under his belt. I think DeVee is an excellent comparison from you, Tracy, because he doesn't really play a position, so to speak. It's very much that, like Mexican flair, where he's just going to bob up in different areas and cause all sorts of problems getting into half spaces. So I wouldn't be massively surprised if you do see, maybe not necessarily on a team sheet and maybe not necessarily in terms of the structure, but something a little bit different from that front two to what we saw with Ball and Hooper last year with, De Vea really just in a free role and potentially more of a, centralised ball trying to drag defenders away to create pockets of space. I could see him being more of a central striker and De Vea playing more that conventional South American, or in this case Mexican, number 10 role where he just floats wherever he wants to go, but each team sheet each week has him playing up front. But that front two is as good a front two as anywhere in the division, which is very impressive to see. Sorry, Zach, what were you going to say?
Last season, I think we did actually play a bit like that. When Hooper was injured, majority of the season before we went over to Australia, we did kind of play with that De Vea kind of circling around just anywhere in the front half of the pitch. But I think we played. I think that was much better. I think that was much better than like when we had Hooper. I feel that with the system we have, having two mobile strikers, neither of them out and out striker, really helped us because we didn't have that person who was just you could mark out of the game. So I think that this system of like having both of them kind of floating around is really going to be good this season.
Yeah, and I mean, we haven't really spoken about him, but Mirza Muradovic, it's always a good sign when players of a different club are upset that a player's left. And I know the 3 or 4 different Raw supporters that we have in the reserve team weren't exactly happy that Muradovic has left the club. So he looks like, I think he's another one that potentially, I don't think he starts, and I think the club's obviously still looking to recruit in that striking area, as you mentioned before, Zach. But, again, he's going to be a player that's hungry for minutes and hungry for time on the pitch. So in limited opportunities off the bench or whatever else, he's going to provide a whole lot of running and a different challenge and something different to try and unlock defenses across the league. Like, you want to have different attacking options in wide areas up front to try and do different things and ask different questions of defense. They've got, I think, Wellington, a very, very different wing options, very different central midfield options, very different striking options, which is going to help them quite a bit. And I'm sure their manager will be able to get the best out of them as well. Right, so jumping back in, guys, we've got a couple more topics that I want to run through. The current manager and assistant, Ufuk Talay and Chris Greenacre, continue their partnership from last season in what is proving to be a very good football program over at the Knicks. Some of your thoughts and feelings, Zach, on Ufuk Talay as a manager, and what do you hope for him this year?
Just to correct you, I think Greeny has just been replaced as the assistant manager. I think Giancarlo Italiano has come in, from what I know, I saw it on social media, and it's on Transfermarkt as well.
Okay, well, Wikipedia has let me down before, and it looks like another time that it has let it go. Has there been any communication from the club around Greenacre?
I think from memory, there was a thing that he had said something, he had changed his Twitter profile or something like that, but somebody did ask the question about whether or not that Greeny had gone, and I think the answer was no, but that's just based on my recollection of the Twitter interaction, so I can't be 100% sure.
We only deal in cold, hard facts here at the reserve team. There will be no Twitter speculation. So maybe we just take a step back with it and we just talk about Ufuk Talay until we figure out what the assistant scenario is like. But Zach, what are some of your hopes for Ufuk Talay in his second season at Wellington?
Well, I just think he's amazing. He's he's brought new life to the club. He's really working well with youth. He's brought in a lot of good players that none of us really saw. I remember in the first game of last season, we were all saying Ulysses de Villa was horrible, and then he turns out to be one of the best in the league. And I think he's just been a breath of fresh air in Wellington. He's built this new atmosphere. He's built a pretty much completely new team, and I just hoping to continue having this team together. Most of it for a year is just going to just keep progressing.
And Tracy, your thoughts on Tale's first season and what you hope for the season ahead?
I mean, I don't think we can fault the first season getting to one of the best positions that we've been in. And I just hope that this season they can do it again, especially under the circumstances of them having to be in Australia full time for the foreseeable future, I think. If we can get some results early and we can really put in a shift, I think that would lend itself really well to, if there is the possibility of coming back to play in New Zealand. Back to the metrics thing, I think if we start well, we can boost those numbers when they come back, because everyone will be raring to watch football.
Yeah, and I think we're all desperate in the reserve team to have that Wellington away trip and away day as well. So hopefully that travel bubble opens up. But yeah, look, I'd echo the same sentiments. He's obviously a coach who has a vision in mind. He's not just a coach filling up the numbers. He knows what he wants to be, which is a great proponent and developer of youth within the league. And so far, one season down, fantastic results, I think, on and off the pitch. And hopefully, that continues on the next season as well. Now, jumping forward, of course, Tracy, you're very much involved in the Yellow Fever, the active support for Wellington Phoenix. They were announced as the Phoenix supporter group the day after the Wellington Phoenix bid was officially announced, so they weren't wasting any time in terms of getting involved in and around the Wellington football landscape. One of the big challenges that not just we spoke about in the metrics, but the whole league really needs to start trying to pick back up to hitting the heights of previous seasons in terms of overall memberships and attendances and all that sort of stuff. There isn't a club in the league that is at a capacity and that is at a good enough level to say that they don't need to be working on it. We've already spoken about trying to get people in the door and trying to get people along to games to watch them. But if you were going to have some sort of membership pitch to people in and around the Wellington area that may be thinking about signing up as a member for this season, maybe one of those remote and distance memberships that we've seen the club offering for the upcoming year, or if you're going to come up with some sort of membership slogan to get people down, what would you do to try and convince someone to come down? Zach, I'll let you go first on this one. How would you pitch a new member to join the club?
I really think it depends on who you're aiming to. If it's someone who doesn't follow any sport, then it's you kind of have to talk about how it's I feel, at least how I feel about like going to the games. It's more about the atmosphere. It's more about cheering for your team. It's more about singing and like not just like cheering for your team rather than the sport itself. But if you're talking to other sports fan, then it's more talking about how just getting behind it's one New Zealand team. It's kind of this fairy tale story of this, like, all up against the odds, this one team in the entire confederation, and it's got these diehard fans that create this great atmosphere, and it's kind of build that story around it and get people invested in that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, the atmosphere is incomparable to any other sport. Like Australia and New Zealand, we both have similar codes. Obviously, the rugby support in New Zealand is much higher and it's more regional specific to within Australia. But like, really, having been to NRL games and Australian Rugby Union games and whatever else, there is no other atmosphere like a full and rocking A-League match. Same for the Football Ferns, same for the All Whites as well. Like a full stadium, there's no atmosphere like it anywhere in the sporting landscape in our particular areas in the world. Tracy, obviously a little bit closer to Yellow Fever, so you might actually have better insights on the marketing material than any of us do, but how would you pitch it to a fan that maybe hasn't been to a game before or is umming and ahhing about getting involved for the season ahead?
I think it's going to be especially hard for the season ahead because, as we've talked about so much, atmosphere is the biggest draw card, and you can't have that watching games on TV. I mean, you can have a pub atmosphere, you can have a watch party atmosphere, but trying to get those new people to buy memberships during this time, I think, is going to be very real struggle, and I don't think it will happen. I think we're going to drop in numbers probably this season because of that, because you're not really getting anything for your money in terms of the actual sport that you want to watch or the atmosphere that you want to experience. But and again, like I touched on, if the team performance is what sells, right? So if the team are performing, if they can come back to New Zealand, if they can play games in Wellington, then people will get behind them, and that's when you need to pounce. I think that's when you need to take everything that you've worked on in the past in terms of trying to boost memberships and and for us to try and get people to come into the Yellow Fever Zone and be active in their support. That's when it's going to count, is when we get the team back to show them how much what they've done for us matters. I think that's another thing. It sounds a little, I don't know what the right word is, but we talk about that the players and the coaching staff have made a sacrifice for us, and it's such a huge sacrifice. And I think it feels a little bit weird to say that. When you think about, usually the word sacrifice on that sort of scale is used for military members and things like that, which obviously this is not that, but it is these players and these families sacrificing their normal day-to-day lives to give us a product. And it's not going to be live product for us, but it is a product, and it is something that we can support. We struggle in the Yellow Fever, I think, with a little bit of succession, I guess, is the issue. So we are all 30 plus years old, the core members of the Yellow Fever. Some are married, some have children, so they're still committed to come to games and stuff, but they can't be a part of that full match day experience all of the time because they have other responsibilities. So we need to try and think about ways to incorporate youth players. And I know that a lot of what we do at the moment is around drinking culture and having a beer in the stands with your mates, which obviously doesn't appeal to everybody. It doesn't appeal to all adults necessarily, but trying to bring in that youth, it's harder to do when that's not a selling point. So I think we need to sort of just think about what else we can do to get people in watching with us. And we've kind of got that. So there's a guy who plays the drum for us, and he is a teenager, and he used to he basically ditches his parents and comes and stands in the zone and bangs the drum, and at half time one of his parents or his sister will bring him a Coke, and but he really likes the environment. Friends of mine, his daughter has been coming since she was 4 or 5, and she's now 10, and she's a part of that Yellow Fever sort of group, and she knows the chants and all of that sort of thing. So I think targeting the kids to be a part of that environment and proving that it's a safe environment, I think is kind of important for us. And we do have that point of difference to other active supports. So you look at the RBB and you look at the Cove and those sorts of more, I'm not trying to offend anyone here, but the more aggressive type of support. I think the Yellow Fever and the Phoenix supporters are not at that level. So we try and make it a family atmosphere at the same time as still having that passion, and it's just more tame, I guess, which we might get laughed at for, but I think we have a really good culture here. And I think talking to fans from across the league, them coming to Wellington is always a priority. You know what, every club wants to do their away day to Wellington and join in if it's a pub crawl at Christmas, which is a feature of the Yellow Fever calendar. We always welcome the fans, so I think that's what sets us apart a little bit. And I've gone off on a massive tangent, I'm sorry, but that's just some of the stuff that we do. So I need to kind of try and promote that it's an atmosphere for everybody. And if you're not comfortable singing and yelling necessarily from the start on the fringes of the Yellow Fever Zone, and you'll find yourself getting closer and closer to the centre to make that noise and to be a part of it, because just watching doesn't feel like enough when you get to that point. And I can say that from experience. When I first started going to the games, free tickets, completely away from the Yellow Fever Zone. When I met the Yellow Fever people, I was still on the fringes of the zone. I wasn't ready to be in the middle, in the mix, but kind of just moved closer and got there, and now I'm hardcore. Hardcore in Yellow Fever terms, not hardcore in active support, because I know that that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, don't ever apologise for going on tangents, because if that's a problem on this channel, this will be my last appearance, because I do it each and every episode that we have. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating comparison that you provide as well, because we've unfortunately in Australia go through a variety of different clubs, and we can't talk about their active support because it doesn't exist in a formal capacity anymore, like Yarraside and Melburnians for Melbourne City, who we just spoke about, the North Terrace and the Old Blue and White Brigade for Melbourne Victory, a variety of clubs around the league through and this is also going to be an unpopular opinion, but through their own, I think, perceived value of self-importance, have walked away and haven't necessarily been replaced. I think Yellow Fever deserves a ton of credit. Whatever they're doing is working within Wellington, and it's working within that group that people that are getting married and having kids and all that sort of stuff still want to be a part of it and still want to be in and around the game, because most of the other sides around the league, particularly on this side of the ditch, is largely teenagers. Like Melbourne City's active support is largely 16, 17-year-old kids. And it's not, it's not as well run. It's not as well known. We don't have a 12 pubs of Lockhead or whatever the actual annual tradition is now called. But, I think the Yellow Fever deserve a tremendous amount of respect for being one of the better run ones in the league, and there's no right way to do it. Like, you don't have to have a worn out DVD of Green Street Hooligans to make you think you're an active support member, and maybe some of the members of the RBB or the Cove need to hear that. But if you talk about the future of the league and getting fans involved at a younger age who are going to be supporters of the club, that's fantastic that your friend has a daughter who's watched the team effectively her whole life, and she'll probably become an adult and take her kids to it and whatever else. We're getting to that stage of the league now, 15, 16 seasons down the track, where really we should be seeing second generation fans coming into it. And perhaps for a lot of clubs, I think that's the key area that they need to work on, not just for Wellington, but for everybody as well. But I think the Yellow Fever do a fantastic job, and hopefully that continues to grow this season as well. Next one, round one fixtures. Now, unfortunately, because the Independent A-League is taking its time with releasing its fixturing, we don't currently know who Wellington are playing at time of recording. And probably, to be honest with you, by the time this episode goes up on Tuesday as well, who they're going to be playing in round one. So I'll just go with more broader season expectations for you guys, and then also your season prediction, how you think they're going to fare. Tracy, I'll let you go first on this one. Season prediction, and where do you expect the Phoenix to finish?
I'm gonna say top 6, but I think we're going to be maybe at the bottom of that top 6. I say that purely because of the depth that we don't have in the younger players. To be honest, I haven't really paid much attention to other squads, and I think we talked about it earlier that a lot of the teams don't actually have squads yet. They have 11 players, and that's all they have right now. So it's hard to know when you can't compare against all of those squads. But I'm putting us in the top 6.
Yeah, I think fair. The sides that don't have players, that's really you can kind of already tell who the bottom 4 are going to be just on the strength of their playing squads. We're now 4 weeks out from the season, so they're not going to have a great preseason, and unfortunately some of those fans and their season previews are coming up in the next few weeks. But I think there's definitely, my own personal opinion, acknowledging my Melbourne City bias, I think Sydney FC have kept largely the same squad together that was already doing very well in the league. I think Melbourne City's probably got the best, maybe not the best 11, but the best depth in terms of their contracted players. I think MacArthur's done a very good job as well. They've got a very strong starting 11. And then there's that kind of group after that top 3. Western Sydney, they might do well if Carl Robinson hits the ground running. Adelaide United are always competitive. They never struggle in a season, so it just depends how strong their younger group of player is. And Wellington's also in that group where really, if Talley continues operating at the same high level he did last season, I think top 3 again is realistic. I think a title challenge would be astronomical considering the additional off-field challenges that they're working through this season. But yeah, the future's bright. I think top 6 would be a minimum, and I think top 4 potentially would be a good return and a good season based on some of the strength of the other squads. Zach, what are you thinking for the year ahead? What are your hopes for the year?
Well, I'm actually thinking completely different from you. I've got the same top 2, but after that I've got I think there's kind of a definite top 5 of City and Sydney up front, then Western, Perth, and the Phoenix just behind them. And I think with Western, Perth, and the Phoenix, it could really be any order. I think Western will probably come ahead of those 3, but I think it's probably just going to be the Phoenix behind them. But really, it could be any order.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a tough part at this part of the season, not knowing what sort of form's like and all that sort of thing. Like, teams aren't playing that many preseason friendlies against each other just because we still have state border restrictions over here in Australia at the moment, so it is hard to gauge this far out. I think Western United's an interesting one that you posed. I don't know if too many of the Mark Rudin haters in the chat or listening along are going to agree with you 100% on that one. They've got a challenge where obviously Diamante's class, and he'll be one of those players that's still turning people at 45 years of age, but they did have an older squad. They're all 12 months older. They haven't really brought anyone younger into that starting 11, so I'm not sure it is as strong a lineup as potentially they had last year. But again, they are another side in that group of kind of middle of the table ones where whoever gets it right, really, they have a clear pathway to finishing in those top 3 spots and potentially getting, so I know you guys can't, but ACL qualification and a full title run for the season ahead. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to play out. Go for it, Zach.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want Western United there, but I think they will be there.
No, look, I don't. As someone who sat through like so many horrific Melbourne Heart seasons, where I was just hoping we'd win one derby each year, like I totally understand tapering expectations and then being pleasantly surprised. I think it's a good way to live and a good way to go through it. That does bring us to the end, though, guys. I think same with all the clubs. We could probably talk for another 2.5, 3 hours on the various things happening in and around New Zealand football and the Wellington Phoenix themselves. Of course, everyone at TRT is firmly in the Knicks in camp. We want to see them doing well because they offer a tremendous amount to the league. Not least of which, because I'll probably be crashing on one of your couches when Melbourne City plays that away day in a few years' time, if we get that travel bubble sorted. But Zach, I'll go to you first. Any plugs for any of your social media, or where can people check out more of your content if they want to see more?
I mean, the reserve team, and then Twitter. I think my handle's there. It's NZZG_24. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's just there. So yeah, go follow me on there if you want, I guess.
Yeah, and fantastic articles up on the reserve team from you already about elite player pathways and players looking at that particular stuff. A fantastic article there. There will be full links to Zach's article content and his Twitter in the description below if you want to go and check him out. Tracy, if people want to see more of your fantastic content, where should they go to find more of you?
Writing on the reserve team, obviously. My Twitter for my ramblings, at the moment it's mostly Team Wellington related stuff. Read all about the team that I love that's not the Phoenix if you really want to. But yeah, my Twitter handle is also in the corner, so check it out if you wish.
Yeah, I mean, this is an A-League season preview, but the reserve team is an Australian and New Zealand football channel. We need to get more, is it ISPS Honda League? I always forget the abbreviation, but we need to get more New Zealand content. So if you want to check out more stuff like that, you can check out Tracy's Twitter in the link below. Also, fantastic articles about your experience with community coaching, which is a subject near and dear to my heart. There will be a link to that article in the description below as well. But really, more than anything, as always with these episodes, we just appreciate you guys watching along with us. If you want to support the channel that little bit further, you can drop a like on this video. Helps us get higher in that YouTube algorithm search results when people look for Australian New Zealand football content. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to be kept up to date on all of our future videos, including your team, which is probably coming up in the next few weeks as far as these season previews are concerned. But from Zach, from Tracy, from the whole reserve team, and from myself, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next time.